the end of this course, you will be able to develop stakeholder engagement guidelines that promote stakeholder engagement and support for your program. Assess program constraints and communication channels to develop viable stakeholder engagement activities. Evaluate stakeholder preferences and feedback to develop engagement activities that promote support for your program. And use appropriate program documents to help stakeholders establish common, high-level expectations for the delivery of your program's benefits. Hi, welcome to this Program Management Success course. I'm Julian, your course narrator. Today, you'll be helping Ping Zhao, an experienced program manager, mentor her colleague, Roy Stackhouse, as he works with her to modify her stakeholder engagement guidelines. We'll catch up with Ping shortly, but first, let me show you around a bit. To advance to the next slide, click on this button. To move back a slide, stakeholder feedback can play a vital role in your program's success. Developing and executing a viable stakeholder engagement plan will help to ensure you receive, track, and respond to this feedback in a way that builds support for your program. Stakeholder engagement plans include a stakeholder register, stakeholder engagement guidelines, and metrics to determine the success of your stakeholder engagements. Today, we'll focus on how to develop stakeholder engagement guidelines. Stakeholder guidelines describe how exactly your program's stakeholders will be engaged. It should include a list of the stakeholder groups you wish to engage, key messages to be delivered, when, where, and how a message will be delivered, and the results you expect to achieve with each engagement. These results should tie back to the engagement plan's metrics for determining overall successful program stakeholder engagement. Before you join Ping and Roy, take this quick assessment on tactics for stakeholder engagement.
Hi, come on in.
Thanks for taking the time to talk with us today.
I'm always glad to help. There are 3 important sets of information I consider when developing guidelines for engagement. The first is program constraints for stakeholder engagement.
Okay, that makes sense.
Consideration of program constraints is critical because I can come up with the greatest ideas for engagements, but if I don't have the money or time to execute them, I won't be able to get the stakeholder feedback I'm looking for. So this is where I review the program plan and look for constraints on costs, schedules, and priorities.
Can we take a minute to review these?
Of course.
Click on the binder to review the program's constraints for stakeholder engagement.
The next set of information I consider when developing guidelines is stakeholder preferences. Any activities or communications I plan should use the channels my stakeholder prefers.
By channels, you mean ways of sending and receiving information.
That's right. You'll need to track your stakeholders' preferences for the kind of information they want and the kind of channel they'd like you to use when communicating. Not every group of stakeholders will be receiving the same kinds of information, and not every channel will be appropriate or desirable. Your stakeholder preferences should be tracked in your stakeholder register. Here's mine. Feel free to review it.
Click on the binder to review Ping's stakeholders' preferences.
Yep, I'm already beginning to gather and track this data.
Good. The more information you get up front, the more likely it is that your engagement guidelines will be viable and effective.
I'd like to learn more about your selection process for channels.
First, tell me what you consider a channel.
Before Roy answers Ping's question, select which of the following channels might be appropriate for engaging with stakeholders.
Okay, now more about channels.
Before Roy answers Ping's question, select which of the following channels might be appropriate for engaging with stakeholders.
Okay, now more about channels. I'm just beginning to identify my stakeholders and learn their preferences. I'm thinking of conducting some meetings with them and, well, maybe sending them a survey.
That might work well. Usually I hold an initial brainstorming session with a few key people to get the ball rolling. Sometimes I use focus groups to get in-depth information from select key representatives of stakeholder groups. If the stakeholder group is large and I want feedback on a regular basis, I might conduct regular polls or surveys of that group. As I begin to send out publications and other forms of communications regularly, previously unidentified stakeholders begin to contact me as well, frequently because someone's passed the information along to them. Here's a list of channels I refer to when planning engagements.
Click on the spreadsheet to enlarge.
Interesting. I think I already have to make some changes to my plan. Here's a question for you. What if a stakeholder group requests changes related to deliverables, such as a request for, say, a change in scope, which would require a new message that needs to be delivered to a current set of stakeholders using new channels?
Something like a request for a change in scope will invoke a lot of program management processes. And you're right, it would likely require you to update your stakeholder engagement plan and guidelines. Sometimes these kinds of issues are directly related to not engaging effectively with stakeholders from the beginning. It's critical that your guidelines include engagements that help your stakeholders establish high-level expectations of the program and its deliverables right from the start. What kinds of program documents do you think I provide to my stakeholders to help establish high-level expectations?
Click on a binder to view its table of contents, then drag the binder over to the stakeholder you think should receive it.
I forwarded the charter to all stakeholders, but the program plan only to select groups of stakeholders.
Sure, because the charter is what we use to set the high-level expectations for all stakeholders.
Yep.
So this engagement plan would be a living document that probably requires modifications as time goes by.
Exactly. You have to be flexible, and you should expect, as stakeholders are identified, that you'll update your engagement plan and guidelines.
Okay, so let me quickly recap the process for developing viable stakeholder engagement guidelines. I have to consider my program's constraints, consider the available engagement channels given these constraints, consider my stakeholders' preferences, and be ready to modify my guidelines as new information is obtained.
You got it. Now let's see if you can apply this knowledge. Help me modify my guidelines. I have a situation right now that's requiring me to update my stakeholder engagement guidelines. Here's my stakeholder register and issues log, as well as the emails I've received regarding the various uses we're planning for the community center we're developing. Take a peek and see for yourself.
Click on the binder to open it, then click on any section you would like to review.
I need to engage with a new set of stakeholders. To make sure I do this effectively, I'll review and revise my stakeholder engagement guidelines. Help me revise the stakeholder engagement guidelines, taking into account my stakeholders' preferences and program constraints. We have to be sure the guidelines conform to my constraints and promote stakeholder engagement and support for my program.
Click on a binder to review its contents. To build a guideline, drag an item to the row and column where you would like it to be.
I love these new guidelines. They stay within the program constraints and use communication channels that honor stakeholder preferences. Executing these guidelines should help me promote the program, gather stakeholder feedback, and build support for the changes we may need to make. Well done!
Helping you revise these guidelines has given me some great ideas for my own program. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about this.
You're most welcome. Oh wait, before you both go, here's a checklist I use to evaluate my guidelines.
This is great. Thanks, Ping.
Looks like you, Roy, and Ping had a great discussion about stakeholder engagement guidelines today. You assessed program constraints and communication channels to develop viable stakeholder engagement activities. Next, you evaluated stakeholder preferences and feedback to develop engagement activities that promote support for your program. You then selected appropriate program documents to help stakeholders establish common high-level expectations for the delivery of your program's benefits. And finally, you developed stakeholder engagement guidelines that promote stakeholder engagement and support for Ping's program. Great job! Oh, by the way, the channels list and guidelines checklist Ping mentioned can be found in the attachments section of this course. I hope these tools help you as you develop guidelines for your own program. Well, I hope you enjoyed the course today and that you'll join us again soon. Bye.